All right. Well, welcome everybody to my webinar. This is Rethinking and Unlearning Nutrition. Again, I am recording this, so I have everyone muted to minimize that background noise. If you have any comments or questions, use the chat box. If you are watching the replay of this on YouTube, feel free to put your questions in the comments on YouTube. My hope is that this webinar will give you some clarity on what's appropriate for us as humans to eat, and that it will make you a little better equipped at making eating decisions for yourself. I don't know where everybody is at as far as do you already do a, low carb type lifestyle? Most of us have learned about nutrition, or what we know about nutrition we learned in school. I know I did. I remember learning about the food pyramid in the third grade, right? And I was introduced to the concept of calories from my mother bringing me to TOPS meetings. For those of you that are over 45, you might remember TOPS. It stands for Take Off Pounds Sensibly. It was like a diet club or support group, and my mom used to go to that and drag me along. And so I kind of absorbed some of the information there. So I learned about calories there. And anything additional that I learned about nutrition was from women's magazines and those morning talk shows. I can remember as a kid watching, I think it was the late 70s or early 80s, watching Richard Simmons. He had a daily talk show, I think. Does anyone remember watching that? Anyway, suffice it to say, what we learned in school and from the media was not only wrong, it was exceptionally wrong. And so we've been told for years and years now to avoid red meat, eat lots of fruits and vegetables. And for about at least the last decade, if not more, we have had the mainstream, the media, the government, the talk show, all these things have been pushing plant-based diets on us, which is the worst possible advice. It's all politically and financially motivated and not based in the science of nutrition at all. So for a long time, there's been, too much emphasis put on, also besides from, pushing plant-based, there's all this emphasis on peer-reviewed studies. Well, what does that even mean? And it's not based on the experiences of real life people. So studies, unfortunately, are corrupted in multiple ways, from, who pays for it. Information has been omitted. There's been flat out, things made up to, present a certain narrative. And this is the process of being, peer reviewed. And it has, it gives these narratives about diet some validation, but it's with wrong, it's being validated with wrong information. There's no checks and balances. So meanwhile, people have been healing themselves, and when they share that information, they're called quacks, or they're told they're going to die from a heart attack or high cholesterol, all that stuff, in spite of the fact that they have, people have reversed their health issues. Just this week, I've been called stupid at least 3 times on Facebook for sharing pictures of meat and eggs that I eat. So real nutrition has been under attack for a very long time. And so it's a hard process for a lot of people to unlearn that information that we have had just hammered at us for our entire life. So I want to take this moment to remind everybody that anecdotal evidence is still evidence. So if you have started healing yourself because you eat more animal foods, that's all the evidence that you need. It shouldn't matter who comes at you throwing their so-called facts or bringing up studies. None of those things matter if you changed what you were eating and healed yourself. So what I want to talk about today is, what does that real nutrition look like? First, I want to ask y'all a question, though. I want you to go ahead and put it in the comments in the chat box and tell me, what form of way of eating are you following right now? Is it low carb, keto, paleo? Are you still following the standard American diet? Is it carnivore? Is it a mix of both? Or, have you been trying to eat a certain way, but you struggle with staying on track and complying? I'm just curious to know, what is your current status as far as your diet? If you're already doing low carb or some sort of low carb or keto real food diet, then you're definitely on the right track. The absolute best diet, keto, okay, great. The absolute best diet for humans, for the optimal, the optimal human diet is real food. The optimal human diet should not include processed foods or seed oils, which are toxic to the human body. I'm going to get back to that. But first, I want to remind everybody that for those of us that are like above age 40 or 45, we remember a time where the entree of a meal was meat. And then there was one or two other things on the plate that were sides, and they were usually, vegetables of some sort. And today there's this movement, this plant-based movement to make plants the entree. And that's never been the case in history. Meat was always the most important part of the meal. And so there is wisdom in tradition. Unfortunately, we are much less healthy today than our ancestors were, in spite of the fact that we have a longer lifespan. So since the 1950s, the nutrition science has convinced people that healthy foods are low fat, low calorie, that they're bland. But the reality is that an optimal human diet has lots of nutrition and flavor. And so this change in our diet over, the last at least 50, 60 to 80 years, and even longer, it's corrupted our genetics. And so not eating enough meat, excessively eating sugar, and being introduced and exposed to seed oils has like royally messed up our bodily systems. And then we pass it on. We pass up those, it's called epigenetics. We pass those damaged genes on generation to generation. So we're looking today at real nutrition. That's the model we're using. And that meat should make up the largest portion of what we consume, volume and calorie wise. Animal proteins, meat. So meat, red meat in particular, is the most nutrient dense food on the planet. It has all the essential amino acids that we need to live optimally and to grow muscle and keep our muscle. And having that muscle is vital for our longevity and our health. The nutrients in animal foods are bioavailable to our body, which means our body can uptake them and use them to hold us together and keep us functioning. Whereas the nutrients in plants are not really bioavailable, and our body can't take them up easily and absorb them and use them. And they don't contain all of the amino acids that we need for muscle, which leads to longevity. So in short, optimal nutrition choices that we can make are meat that's still on the bone, even if it's not on the bone, it's still really great for us. Eating some organs, some fresh plant products, and some fermented or sprouted foods. Like, that's ideal. So now there's been times where I've talked about this, and one of the objections from people is that it's too expensive to eat healthy. But I just want to remind everybody that eating healthy and, yes, spending more on fresh whole foods is not nearly as expensive as medical care and prescriptions and co-pays and all of that. Or, if you don't have insurance, paying for office visits and paying for prescription medications, that's really, really expensive. And I think the highest price of all is the price that we pay with a lower quality of life when we are not following an optimal human diet. So I know there's some sort of elitism out there in the animal-based diet world where people talk about, only eating grass-fed or organic, stuff like that. But that's not necessary. If you're coming off of a lifetime of following and eating a terrible standard American diet that includes, that you've eaten primarily processed foods. I can think back as long as I can remember as a kid in the 70s when processed foods were still relatively new on the scene. It's still mostly what I ate as a kid. I can remember like my mom making, mac and cheese out of the box and eating hot dogs and always having cookies and that type of thing around the house. So if we've had a lifetime of eating primarily processed foods, then just switching to eating real food that includes animal products, whether they're organic or grass-fed or not, that's going to make a massive improvement right there, just with the diet change. And it's okay to eat the meat that you can afford. And we just need to become an expert, label reader and make sure that we're not buying packaged processed meats that have fillers and sugars and things added to it. We should just buy the, whole fresh meats from the meat department at our grocery store. And if you have the opportunity to buy local meat that's been grass fed and grass finished, and you like and enjoy the taste of it, and you can afford that, then by all means get that when you can. I probably a few times a year stock my freezer I buy local meat that was raised within 20 miles of my house, from a friend of my son who he raises cattle and pigs and lamb. And so I get, about 3 times a year, I buy meat from him and stock the freezer. And the rest of the time I'm buying, just regular grocery store meat. So it's okay to do that. There's no real evidence that eating store-bought grocery store meat that isn't organic or grown locally is harmful for us in any way that is comparable or worse than eating processed foods. So eat the meat you can afford. The reality is that traditional real foods are going to be much more diverse and nutrient dense than the foods that most people typically eat. So when all you've eaten is hyper palatable processed foods, it can take a while for your palate to heal. So maybe you feel like, nothing tastes good. And you're looking for, seasonings, things to make things taste better. It's probably because your palate has to do some healing, and eventually you'll be able to taste the rich flavors of real food. And it's an amazing experience when that finally happens. So those of you that follow me on social media know that I'm not a big plant eater. I'm not necessarily anti-plant. I just don't really enjoy many of them. Vegetables have never been my thing. So I only eat them. I only eat the ones I enjoy, and I eat them occasionally, when I want them. I also only eat foods that don't compel me to binge eat. So as someone who's in recovery from eating disorders, I don't partake in drug foods, even if they are real food or considered healthy, because they aren't healthy for me if they steal my peace of mind and they compel me to want to overeat. So the number one thing when it comes to nutrition is that our choices be real foods. There's a lot of dietitians and nutritionists out there that encourage the use and consumption of processed foods. And at the risk of sounding like I have a tinfoil hat on, that's probably because their affiliating organizations are sponsored by processed food companies, and also, not surprisingly, pharmaceutical companies. So the narrative that they push is that all foods fit. But I think it's clear now as the decades go by and our population becomes fatter and sicker, that isn't the case, that all foods fit, that clearly something's gone wrong in our food system that has caused so many people to be overweight, obese, and have, all those modern diseases of civilization. So we're much better off eating only real food, but unfortunately there's not a whole lot of profit in that. So, that's what we're stuck with. So back to animal protein. So they should be the largest portion of our meals. Coming up behind it is fat. Healthy dietary fats should also make up a good portion of our caloric intake. We have been, unfortunately, bombarded with also wrong information and dogma about fats. Like how, those of us that have been around a little while longer, we lived through the low fat, fat free craze. I remember there was a time there was a fake fat that was being used that they ended up taking off the market because it was giving people horrible digestion problems, and people were leaking fluids and things like that because of it. So, a lot of us have been through all that, and we often hear that, fat is, it's going to give us heart attacks, that it makes us fat, but that's really not true. Healthy saturated fats should be a good part of a real food, optimal human diet. So we hear a lot that we should eat lean proteins to be healthy, but that really misses the mark. Proteins, yes, but lean proteins, not so much. Maybe occasionally you're working them in, especially if you prefer the taste of leaner proteins over fattier proteins, or maybe it's a texture thing. As long as you're working in some healthy fats with that, that's what's important. We should be eating fatty protein, but does that have to mean pork belly every day? No, we can, we should eat red meat. That should make up the majority of our proteins is red meat that's reasonably marbled. You could, of course, work pork belly in there. You can eat the skin on chicken. We were told, for decades, we were told, don't eat chicken skin, right? But there's some good nutrients and fats in the skin. Protein and fat, especially together, is going to result in satiation, which is what people need, because one of the biggest reasons, besides all the components of eating disorders, that people overeat is because they're not satiated, because hyperpalatable fake foods don't satiate. Seed oils are not satiating. Sugar and carbohydrates are not satiating. So when we eat hyperpalatable processed foods with rancid seed oils, that satiation isn't going to be there, because there's nothing in those items of food that the body can sufficiently use. So therefore, people feel like they're hungry all the time. They can't get full beyond an hour. Maybe you can eat a lot of food in one sitting and you feel full, but then an hour later you could eat again. But when you eat animal proteins that have a sufficient amount of dietary fats, then you're much more likely to feel full and satisfied after a meal. And, speaking of fats, nature does not make bad fats. Corporations and factories do. So good fats and traditional fats that can handle, the heat when being cooked are things like olive oil, butter, macadamia nut oil, coconut oil, and animal fats like lard or tallow, duck fat, camel fat. Like, there's animal fats out there that we should prioritize, and we should completely 100% avoid the seed oils, basically the industrial era fats and they can't handle, high heat, because it makes them rancid and they oxidize when they're being cooked. And that does terrible damage to our bodies. It's things like canola oil, soy, sunflower oil, cottonseed oil, corn oil, grapeseed, safflower oil, and then all those non-butter things like, margarine and butter spreads and vegan butter and plant butter. Just stay away from all of those. We definitely want to avoid things like margarine and salad dressings or sauces that have any of these types of bad oils. We should definitely avoid soy-based products like those milks and cheeses. In other words, the plant-based versions of dairy products. Just eat real fat and protein-rich dairy, raw dairy if you can. When it comes to nuts and nut butters, you want to avoid anything that has ingredients other than nuts and salt. If there's any type of oil added to it, you should avoid that. Avoid any and all foods that are deep fried in any of those bad fats, of course. All the processed foods that have these fats are listed on their labels. And guess what those are? The things like chips and crackers and breads and granola bars and cookies and pre-cooked and frozen meals, all of those so-called convenience foods, which are not convenient at all for our health. All of those bad oils create inflammation in our body, and they set us up for things like insulin resistance, obesity, heart disease, kidney disease, cancer, and all those other modern diseases of civilization. The vegetable oil, otherwise known as seed oil, is a huge detriment to our brain, because they make our brain more susceptible to damage. Like, there's inflammation. And so then our brains are more easily damaged by sugar, which is very overconsumed by the average human. So when we eliminate these seed oils, then our brain can start to heal and work more like it's supposed to. So seed oils also negatively impact our gut health, which is something else millions of people suffer from, like digestive disorders like ulcerative colitis, IBS, Crohn's, etc. So, protein and fat should make up the majority of we eat, but it should be those real natural animal fats, not man-made fats that came from a factory. Okay, so the protein and fat should make up the majority of what we eat. Like, visually on our plate should be filled with mostly animal protein, not mostly vegetables. So speaking of vegetables, what about carbs? So carbs are so controversial, aren't they? But it doesn't have to be. There are many carbs that should quite obviously be avoided, like all those processed carbs we talked about and mentioned earlier, like the cookies and the snack cakes and crackers, all those packaged foods that no one should be eating ever. There are whole food carbs that are perfectly fine to eat. So we don't want to eat them in excess though, because, you know, they're still carbohydrates. The body still processes them as sugar, converts it to glucose. And so if we eat, you know, several hundred grams of carbohydrates per day from, even if it is real whole foods and we aren't metabolically healthy, it can still, you know, cause us metabolic damage. So there's, you know, those carbs that are perfectly okay to eat if we don't eat them in excess and if we're not metabolically compromised. Most of us coming into this space though, into the low carb keto carnivore space, we start out severely metabolically compromised. And so perhaps in the beginning, you know, that's why there's the recommendation by so many people to eat only, you know, 20 grams of carbohydrates a day. And that's because people are severely metabolically compromised. So in the beginning, there are some whole foods that we should, you know, that should be avoided in certain amounts and, or, in, you know, in frequency until, you know, you've experienced that significant healing and reached a point where your body can properly process those things. So carbs are not inherently bad. I know they have a really bad reputation and there's lots of good reasons for that, but what has been done to them over the last century has also contributed to what makes them bad. Also, the overconsumption of them makes the result of eating them bad, but carbs in and of themselves are not terrible for us. It just depends on the type and the amount and the frequency. So unfortunately, this is a point of contention in this space. There's lots of people that believe that literally plants are slowly killing us. I'm not necessarily in that camp, but you know, I guess there's an argument to be made for that people make. I eat plants, I enjoy them, but I don't eat them in excess or every day necessarily. So there's a case to be made that plants have anti-nutrients and toxins because that's their only form of defense. And there's plenty of anecdotal evidence from people's experiences that show they've been harmed by eating certain plant foods or eating them in excess. And when I say plant foods, I'm not only talking about produce. Sometimes people like get, you know, what? Vegetables and fruits, not bad for us. I'm not talking about produce necessarily. All of those packaged foods are plant-based. Okay, that's what I'm referring to. However, there's lots to be learned about produce as well. You know, first of all, a lot of produce in the grocery store has been genetically modified to be bigger, sweeter, juicier than what our ancestors would have eaten. There's even things in the produce section that you will never, ever find in the natural world growing in the wild because they're man-made, like broccoli and cauliflower. There is no broccoli tree or bush out there growing in the wild that you will come across on a hike. It just doesn't exist. So most plant foods have an abundance of fiber, which is also a very controversial subject. I'm in the camp that says we don't need a lot of fiber, if any at all. And I believe that for lots of reasons, which I won't go into today, but I would encourage you all to check out the website gutsense.org and the book called Fiber Menace. Both of those resources are very, there's lots of information about fiber and how the body treats it. One quick thing that I will tell you about fiber is that many people believe that they need fiber in order to be regular with their bowel movements, and that just is not the case. First of all, fiber actually irritates our gut, and when our gut is irritated, what happens is there's a fluid that's secreted when the gut is irritated, and that fluid is secreted as an attempt to heal the gut. And then when the fluid's secreted, it pushes everything out. So then that's why people think that we need fiber to be regular. But if we just skip that whole process of irritating the gut by eating lots of fiber, then we would go regularly without issues. So we can expect there to be a time of regulation and healing for you to go regularly. You know, after you give up a higher intake of fiber, there probably is an adjustment period. I know that a lot of times when people start a low carb diet, they complain of not going regularly. They're used to going, but there's a couple reasons for that. One is you're typically eating a lot less food, which results in less waste. Let's remember our bowel movements. Waste is the parts of the food that the body can't use or doesn't need. And so when you're eating less food and you're eating less fiber because you're only limiting your you're keeping your carbs very low, then there's going to be less waste. But think about those, just one last thought about fiber. Think about those babies that are exclusively breastfed, that they're not getting an abundance of fiber from breast milk, yet they're pooping every day, right? Babies poop every day, and it can be the same for you. So carbs, in other words, plant foods, have fiber. And if we eat too many of them, we can develop diseases in our gut. We can develop insulin resistance. We can become overweight due to that insulin resistance. We can get high blood pressure, skin irritations, and none of those problems are directly caused by eating animals. So it only makes sense that what we eat the least of is what has the potential to, be the most harmful. So whether you choose paleo, low carb, keto, carnivore, it needs to be mostly animal foods with just a tad bit of vegetation in order to be eating optimally. So you have the best potential for optimal health when you're eating only real food, avoiding seed oils, and keeping your carb intake reasonable, and limit it to whole foods and not processed foods. So you can see improvement in your health and perhaps your body composition just by following that. Just changing your nutrition can give you great improvements. And I do believe in doing more than changing your nutrition, but that's not, what we're talking about today. There's all other things that you can do, of course, to live optimally, but focus on eating just real food, mostly animals with a little bit of plants, and that you can tolerate and without negative consequence. I have some time for questions. If anybody has any questions, you can either unmute yourself or use the chat box. Any questions? Let's see. I think there's things in the chat. Keto, yep. Okay, good. Seems like most everybody's already eating a optimal human diet in some way. Nadia?
Mary, yes. I have a question. I'm listening with my husband, so he was talking about what is plant-based. I know you just said it, but you made me laugh. I never in my life knew that broccoli and cauliflower were not a plant, right? They're not.
I mean, they're a plant, but they were created to be bred. Like somebody created and designed them to grow. They don't grow naturally, right? Out in the wild, right? Like in the rainforest, you can find a lot of things growing naturally. Broccoli and cauliflower are not one of those things. They are considered a man-made food.
Okay.
Yeah. So plant-based. So carbohydrates are all plants. So grains and sugar are both plants. So any, thing that comes in a box, pasta, rice, potatoes, all the green vegetables, all fruits, breads, tortillas, beans, all of those things, those are all carbohydrates.
Okay.
Those are all plants.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Anyone else? Any questions? Nope. All right. Well, it seems like most of you are not new to this way of eating. So hopefully today was a good, refresher course for you, and a reminder. And I hope it, helps you decide, helps you in your eating decisions. If you have any, I will be sending an email and it'll have a link to the replay. If you have someone in your life who you feel needs to hear this information, then you can share that with them. And if you have any questions, you can always comment on the comment section of the replay. Thank you so much to those of you that were here today. I appreciate it. Michelle says, great refresher while eating pork belly eggs. Yeah, nothing wrong with pork belly, right? But we can eat more than pork belly on keto. That we can eat all of the different meats. And if you don't prefer pork belly, which is mostly fat and not a ton of protein, that's it's a great thing that you can play around with your macros with. Nadia?
I'm sorry, Mary. One more question. So When you were talking about what you went through in your life, growing up, what you remember, my mom would say that wheat bread is good for you and eggs are bad for you.
Yeah.
But now it's not like that, right? People,
right.
and they're saying that eggs were bad because of the high cholesterol.
Right.
But
so, that's what I'm talking when I talk about how we have things to unlearn. That's one of them.
right.
Like, I believed that my whole life too. I was told, we thought that, wheat is thrown at us as good, right? We're told to eat heart healthy whole grains, which,
Right.
I mean, there's nothing heart healthy about them. They cause us inflammation. And look at so many people that have gluten intolerances, or people with celiac, and then there's the whole blood sugar issue. So, and then eggs are real food, right? They come from an animal. They're very nutrient rich and nutrient dense. The majority of the nutrition is in the yolk of the egg, and they're literally, and despite like all of the things out there that is said on a regular basis by doctors and nutritionists and media representatives, eating dietary cholesterol is not linked to a bad cholesterol panel. And speaking of that, like, this is like a whole rabbit hole we could go down, but the body makes cholesterol and needs cholesterol. And it's not acquired from eating cholesterol rich foods. And the parts of our lipid panel that we have to be concerned with, the things that do matter when it comes to things like heart disease and heart attacks, is the triglycerides. That's fat in the blood. So we want triglycerides to be low. And then HDL, which is what everyone calls the good cholesterol, we want that to be on the higher end, over 50 or 60 for most people. That's where we want to see it. Literally, the thing that everybody is concerned about, LDL, there's not one study that exists that shows that people with high LDL have heart attacks at a rate higher than people with low LDL. It's literally not a factor. And so, the cholesterol science, a lot of people are like behind on that, but more and more information is coming out, and people are discovering that that's not really what matters. It's our triglycerides and our HDL that we have to be concerned with. And the best way to have a healthy lipid panel is by eating animal foods. Rachel, do you have a question? You're muted. There we go.
I know, you said that in the beginning. One thing I get pressure about is, like, people say I have to eat a lot of like fruit. I said I eat some plants. I grow a lot of the stuff I eat. I've got green beans here in my living room.
Great.
And stuff. But it's like, no, I don't do a lot of fruits. Actually, I don't do any.
Yeah. So it depends on the fruit. And again, like, see, there's like no blanket statement that can be made, but people do this all the time, right? They're like, oh, fruit is healthy. Well, in what context? Because I can tell you that when I was morbidly obese and I was deep in my eating disorder and binging, I definitely binged on fruit. I would eat 4 or 5 bananas at once while dipping it in a bowl of Cool Whip. Okay. So I binged on, eating 5 bananas is like a ton of carbohydrates and sugar. And I was insulin resistant. I had type 2 diabetes. So there was nothing healthy about me eating those bananas. Like, eating those 5 bananas was not doing good things in my body. But again, this is that nutritional dogma that we've met up with our entire life that we have to unlearn. So again, fruit's a carbohydrate. There's nothing inherently bad about carbohydrates. It depends on what our situation is. Like, what is the condition of my relationship with food? Is it such that I'm going to binge on fruit, which is half fructose and half sucrose, and that is going to do, metabolically damaging things because I'm already metabolically unhealthy? Or do I just eat like 1 apple every couple of weeks and I'm metabolically healthy, and my body does what it's supposed to when it's introduced, to a lot of carbohydrates at once? Like, the context of it matters so much, and it's so hard to explain to people. So, there are some fruits that I eat berries if I'm going to eat fruit, or avocado and tomato and olives, which are also fruits, but people don't traditionally think of them as fruit. And so we just have to know our situation. If we're still trying to reverse type 2 diabetes and still severely insulin resistant or still have weight to lose, it's probably not a good idea to eat fruit. And I know that makes some people crazy, but I mean, it is what it is. It's fruit is sugar. There's a reason they call it nature's candy, right? And if you don't believe, if you're metabolically compromised and you want to know what it does to you when you eat it, you could experiment, eat it and test your blood sugar before you eat it, and then every 30 minutes up to 2 hours, and see what your blood sugar result is. If you get this huge spike and then it comes crashing down 2 hours later, lower than it was before you ate, that is not a good result, right?
Right.
All right. Anyone else? Did I miss any in the comments here? Oh, the book is Fiber Menace, and the website is Gut Sense. It's GUTSENSE.org. And there's lots of articles in there about the different types of gut diseases and how fiber affects them.
Now that I know olives are a fruit, now I can tell them that I eat fruit, because I love olives.
Yes, you say, yeah, I eat fruit. I eat olives, avocado, tomato.
There we go.
All right. Anyone else? No? All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody. Keep an eye out for the email with the replay. And if you think of any other questions, feel free to ask. Have a great day, everybody.
You too.